A runaway breaks into a mansion to rob it, but finds two twin babies having seizures. When their dad arrives, he's shocked by what he sees. Comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain hammered mercilessly against the windows of the imposing mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood of the sprawling metropolis, creating a melancholic symphony that masked the silent footsteps of the 30-year-old woman moving through the shadows of the luxurious garden. Her green eyes, hardened by a life of survival on the streets and marked by invisible scars of injustices that haunted her, studied every window of the property with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. The fugitive had deliberately chosen that stormy night, knowing that the sound of the tempest would muffle any noise of her break-in. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold air as she carefully forced the lock of a side door, her hands trembling not only from the cold, but from the tension of knowing that this would be her last heist before leaving the city for good. The false accusations against her made every day a fight for survival, and she desperately needed resources to disappear forever. Upon managing to open the door, her bare feet touched the cold marble of the entrance hall, and she allowed herself a moment to absorb the opulence around her. Crystal chandeliers hung majestically from the high ceiling, reflecting the little light that came through the windows, while expensive paintings adorned the walls paneled with fine wood. It was a world completely different from the dirty streets and dark alleys where she had learned to survive in recent months. Her fingers closed tightly around the small flashlight she carried, and she began to silently climb the marble staircase towards what she imagined to be the main office of the house. Each step seemed to echo in her ears like a drum, despite her efforts to move like a shadow. Upon reaching the second floor, a wide hallway stretched before her, with several closed doors on each side. She had studied the floor plan of the house through public records, knowing that the office was at the end of the hallway, where she would probably find enough valuables to guarantee her definitive escape. It was then that a sound made her stop completely, her heart racing inside her chest. A desperate cry, weak but persistent, came from one of the doors to her left. It wasn't the normal cry of a spoiled child. There was something of agony in that sound that touched a part of her soul that she thought she had buried forever. Her maternal instincts, which she believed she had lost when her own life fell apart, awakened with an overwhelming force. Against all her planning and common sense, she slowly moved towards that door, her fingers trembling as she turned the golden doorknob. The door opened silently, revealing a luxurious nursery bathed in the soft light of a moon-shaped nightlight. Two white cribs occupied the center of the room, and what she saw made her drop the flashlight, which rolled across the carpeted floor. Two twin babies, who didn't seem to be more than a few months old, were writhing in their cribs with bluish faces and extremely labored breathing. Their small hands waved weakly in the air, and their cries were interspersed with moans of pain that broke the heart of anyone who heard them. The scene was desperate, and she immediately realized that those children were in critical condition. Without hesitating for even a second, the woman who moments before had planned to rob instantly transformed into a savior. Her hands, which trembled with nervousness, now moved with surgical precision as she picked up the first baby, checking its vital signs with the expertise she had acquired years ago when she worked as a nurse's aide before her life turned into a nightmare. First aid techniques came back to her mind as if she had practiced them yesterday. She carefully positioned the first baby to facilitate their breathing, whispering words of comfort as tears began to roll down her face. The second twin needed equally urgent attention, and she moved quickly between the two cribs, applying delicate maneuvers to stabilize the breathing of both. When she managed to get the little ones to breathe more regularly, she desperately looked for a phone in the room, finding a device on a bedside table decorated with teddy bears. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911, reporting the critical situation with a voice choked with emotion. It was during this call that she heard heavy footsteps rapidly ascending the marble staircase, echoing through the house with an urgency that made her blood run cold. She realized that she had been discovered, but her own safety no longer mattered. All she could think about were those two small, defenseless beings who depended on her at that crucial moment. The nursery door opened violently, and a tall man appeared in the entrance like a human storm. His piercing blue eyes, normally cold and calculating, widened in shock at seeing an unknown woman holding his children in her arms, whispering words of comfort while tears rolled freely down her face. The 30-year-old millionaire businessman, with the appearance of a movie star and an imposing stature, had come home expecting to find a common thief, but the scene before him defied all logic. The businessman remained motionless for long seconds, his brain struggling to process the impossible scene before his eyes. The woman continued to cradle his children with experienced movements, completely focused on the well-being of the babies, as if his presence were secondary. When he finally managed to find his voice, the words came out hoarse and filled with confusion. Her explanation came in broken fragments, her words mixing with sobs as she recounted how she had found the twins in critical condition. The millionaire felt his legs weaken when he understood the gravity of the situation. Their nanny, a middle-aged woman he considered trustworthy, had disappeared without a trace, abandoning two seriously ill children to their own fate. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later, its siren cutting through the stormy night like a knife. The paramedics confirmed the businessman's worst fears. The twins suffered from a rare heart condition that required constant monitoring and specific medication at precise intervals. The negligence of that night could have been fatal, and only the stranger's quick and competent intervention had saved their lives. During the frantic ride to the hospital, the businessman watched the unknown woman who followed in the ambulance, holding the hand of one of the babies while whispering lullabies that seemed to calm the small, racing hearts. There was something deeply maternal in her gestures, a genuine tenderness that contrasted drastically with her tattered appearance and her eyes marked by suffering. The following hours passed in a fog of anxiety and medical procedures. The doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize the twins, confirming that the heart condition had worsened dangerously due to the lack of adequate medication. The businessman moved through the hospital like a ghost, alternating between overwhelming gratitude for the woman who had saved his children and growing fury against the nanny who had abandoned them. It was during one of those silent vigils in the waiting room that fragments of the stranger's story began to emerge. She revealed, reluctantly and with a choked voice, that she had been a nurse's aide some years ago, before her life completely fell apart. The false accusations against her had destroyed not only her career, but her entire existence, forcing her to live in the shadows as a fugitive. The businessman listened to each word with growing fascination and horror, realizing that the woman before him carried deep scars of injustices that he could barely comprehend. She spoke about nights sleeping in overcrowded shelters, days looking for work that no one offered to a person with a criminal record, and the constant feeling of being hunted for crimes she had never committed. When the twins were finally declared stable, it was already dawn. The storm had passed, leaving the wet streets reflecting the city lights like broken mirrors. The businessman watched the woman preparing to leave, her shoulders bent by the weight of a life that seemed to have no certain destiny. It was then that an idea began to form in his mind, a proposal that surprised even himself. The deal he offered was unusual and fraught with moral complexities that both recognized. She would take care of his children as a nanny, receiving in return not only a generous salary, but protection and a safe place to hide from the ghosts of her past. The proposal sounded almost too good to be true, but the woman's desperate situation left little room for much questioning. She accepted reluctantly, knowing that she had no other viable options. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed by either of them. The woman who had broken into his house to steal would now become responsible for the most precious possessions of his life. There was a poetic justice in this twist that both found simultaneously disturbing and comforting. The first few days in the mansion were marked by palpable tension. The fugitive moved through the house like a cautious ghost, always alert, never allowing herself to relax completely. The businessman, in turn, watched her every move with a mixture of gratitude and natural distrust, fighting against his own prejudices about who she really was. However, as the weeks passed, a strange routine began to establish itself. The late nights taking care of the twins created moments of unexpected intimacy between them. She demonstrated a natural competence with the children that went far beyond her medical training, as if she possessed a deeply rooted maternal instinct that guided her in every gesture. The businessman began to notice small details that revealed her true nature. The way she hummed softly to calm the babies during nighttime crises, how she meticulously organized the medications and schedules, and especially how her eyes lit up with genuine tenderness whenever she held one of the children. It was during one of those late nights, while they walked through the corridors of the mansion trying to calm one of the twins who was crying inconsolably, that she began to reveal deeper fragments of her story. Her words came out hesitantly, as if each memory was a wound being reopened, but there was an urgent need to be understood that drove her to continue speaking. The most devastating revelation came in an almost inaudible whisper. She had lost a child years ago, a tragedy that explained why her maternal instincts remained so sharp and painfully present. The pain in her voice was so raw and genuine that the businessman felt something breaking inside his own chest, a barrier that he didn't even know existed. In response to her vulnerability, he found the courage to share his own agony. The guilt he carried for the death of his wife during the twins' birth was a weight that crushed him daily. He spoke about how he woke up every night with the feeling that he had failed to protect the woman he loved, and how the responsibility of raising 2 children with special medical needs alone terrified him. The following months brought a gradual transformation that neither had anticipated. The mansion, once silent and melancholic, now echoed with sounds of life, muffled laughter from the twins, whispered conversations during the late nights, and an atmosphere of mutual care that grew imperceptibly with each passing day. The fugitive had become a constant and comforting presence, not only for the children, but for the businessman himself, who was beginning to question his own definitions of family and belonging. The connection between them deepened through small shared moments that seemed insignificant, but carried immense emotional weight. When one of the twins fell ill during the night, they worked together as a perfectly synchronized team, she applying her medical knowledge while he provided everything that was needed. These situations revealed a natural intimacy that both pretended not to notice during daylight hours. The businessman began to observe details about her that had previously gone unnoticed. The way her eyes softened when she looked at the babies, how she hummed melancholic melodies while preparing the bottles, and especially how her presence transformed the house into something that actually felt like a home. He found himself wondering what her life had been like before the accusations, what kind of woman she had been when the world still made sense. It was during a rainy afternoon, while organizing some documents in his office, that the businessman made a discovery that chilled his blood. Among his company papers, he found references to old contracts with the law firm responsible for the false accusations against her. The connection was not direct, but close enough to create a devastating moral conflict that threatened to destroy everything they had built together. The discovery tormented him for days. Every look she gave him seemed to carry a silent accusation, even knowing that she was not yet aware of this connection. The weight of guilt consumed him, making him question whether his company had, in some way, contributed to the destruction of her life. The cruel irony of the situation left him awake during the nights, watching her care for his children with the same dedication as always. When he finally mustered the courage to reveal this connection, her reaction was more devastating than any outburst of anger. The silence that followed his confession seemed to stretch for an eternity, her green eyes hardening again with the distrust that he thought had disappeared forever. She didn't scream or make dramatic accusations. She simply walked away from him as if she had been physically hurt. The following days were marked by an almost unbearable tension. She continued to care for the twins with the same competence as always, but avoided any unnecessary contact with him. The intimate late-night conversations ceased completely, replaced by an icy professionalism that created an emotional distance more painful than any open argument. It was during this period of coldness between them that an external threat emerged, forcing them to confront dangers that went far beyond their personal conflicts. The twins' former nanny, who had mysteriously disappeared on the night the children almost died, resurfaced with financial demands that revealed a much more sinister plot than either had imagined. The middle-aged woman, whom the businessman had considered trustworthy, was involved in a scheme of intentional neglect fueled by gambling debts that had driven her to despair. She deliberately put the children at risk, manipulating medication schedules and creating emergency situations that could result in tragedy, all to extort money from wealthy and desperate parents. The blackmail she now practiced was doubly cruel. Not only did she demand an exorbitant sum in exchange for her silence about the fugitives' whereabouts, but she also threatened to reveal to the authorities that a wanted felon was caring for vulnerable children. The situation put everyone in danger, especially the twins, who would inevitably become embroiled in a devastating public scandal. The businessman felt his fortune, built through years of careful investments in stocks and diversified holdings, become irrelevant in the face of this threat. All his assets in dollars and euros, his stock market holdings, and even his investments in cryptocurrency seemed insignificant compared to the safety of the woman who had become essential to his family. The fugitive, in turn, faced the cruelest dilemma of her life. Leaving would mean abandoning the children she had learned to love as daughters, but staying put everyone at risk. The injustice of the situation consumed her, especially since she had finally found a place where she felt needed and valued, only to discover that this refuge was built on unstable foundations. During the tense negotiations with the blackmailer, disturbing details about the intentional neglect began to emerge. The former nanny revealed, with a calculating coldness that shocked both of them, how she had systematically manipulated the twins' medical conditions to create emergencies that would justify requests for money for specialized treatments that she claimed were necessary. The discovery that someone had deliberately endangered his children for financial gain awakened a fury in the businessman that he didn't know he possessed. His wealth accumulated over the years, including holdings in investment funds and treasury bonds, suddenly found a more meaningful purpose than the simple accumulation of capital. As they worked together to dismantle the threat, the emotional distance between them began to gradually diminish. The need to protect the twins created an alliance that transcended their personal conflicts, forcing them to rediscover the trust that had been shaken by the revelation of the business connections. The fugitive demonstrated impressive courage in confronting the blackmailer, using her own experience as a victim of injustice to anticipate the movements of the woman who was now trying to destroy the new life she had built. Her determination to protect the children revealed an inner strength that had remained intact despite all the traumas she had faced. During a particularly tense confrontation, when the former nanny threatened to expose everything to the authorities, something definitely changed between the businessman and the fugitive. They looked at each other across the room, and in that silent moment, both understood that they had become something more than employer and employee, more than two adults united only by the need to protect vulnerable children. The intensity of the situation created an emotional closeness that neither was prepared to face. When she held his hand during a particularly difficult call with the blackmailer, the businessman felt an electric current run through his body, a connection that went far beyond gratitude or practical necessity. The battle against the blackmailer had turned into a war of nerves that lasted for weeks, each day bringing new threats and increasingly absurd demands. The businessman had mobilized all the resources of his considerable fortune, including his best lawyers and private investigators, determined to protect not only his children, but the woman who had become the center of his existence in ways he still struggled to fully understand. It was during a desperate search for evidence in the archives of his own company that the most extraordinary discovery of their lives emerged as a gift from fate. Hidden in a dusty drawer in his office, an old security recording that had been filed away and forgotten contained the irrefutable evidence of her innocence that everyone had been looking for years. The recording clearly showed the real criminal committing the acts for which the fugitive had been falsely accused. Every second of the video was a painful vindication of her story, proving not only her innocence, but revealing the extent of the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. The businessman watched those images with a broken heart, finally understanding the magnitude of the injustice she had faced. When he called her into his office and played the recording, her reaction was even more devastating than he had anticipated. She remained in absolute silence as she watched her life being rebuilt frame by frame, tears rolling silently down her face without her seeming to notice. Years of pain, humiliation, and flight dissolved in those crucial minutes that changed everything. The revelation of the recording not only freed her from all the accusations, but also provided the necessary tools to completely dismantle the former nanny's blackmail scheme. Confronted with irrefutable evidence of her own criminal actions and the innocence of the woman she was trying to blackmail, the former employee saw her position of power unravel instantly. With her reputation finally restored and free from all the accusations that had haunted her existence, the fugitive faced the most difficult decision of her life. The whole world was open to her again, offering possibilities that she had considered lost forever. She could leave, rebuild her life away from the painful memories, resume her career in the medical field, and start completely from scratch. However, the twins, now a year old and flourishing under her dedicated care, had become much more than just children under her responsibility. They were the family she never thought she would have again, small beings who depended on her not only to survive, but to grow in an environment of love and security that she had helped create. The businessman watched her struggle with this impossible decision, realizing that his own happiness depended entirely on her choice. During the year they had spent together, he had rediscovered not only the ability to trust another person, but also the possibility of loving again in a way he thought had died with his wife. The sexual tension that had grown silently between them during months of forced proximity and shared intimate moments had transformed into something much deeper and more meaningful. It wasn't just physical desire, but an emotional connection that transcended their differences in background and the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. It was during one of those sleepless nights, when both were walking through the corridors of the mansion lost in thoughts about the uncertain future, that the decision of both crystallized in an unexpected and completely natural way. They met in the twins' room, watching the children sleep peacefully, and in that silent moment both understood that they had already made their choices without realizing it. The moment that definitively sealed everyone's fate came in a surprisingly simple and profoundly emotional way, One of the twins, waking from a restless dream, stretched out his little arms towards her and clearly pronounced his first word. It wasn't Daddy, as would be natural, but Mommy, a word that emerged from his little heart with an innocent certainty that broke down all the remaining barriers between the two adults. Her reaction to this first word was visceral and transformative. She picked up the baby, whispering words of love, while tears of joy rolled down her face. And at that moment, the businessman understood that she had already made her choice. She would not leave because she could not abandon the children who had become her daughters of the heart. When the second twin also woke up and repeated the same magic word, both adults looked at each other across the dimly lit room, and finally admitted aloud what their hearts had known for months. The love that had blossomed silently during that transformative year could no longer be denied or ignored. His confession came first, his words coming out hesitant but laden with an absolute sincerity that she had learned to recognize and value. He spoke about how she had transformed not only his house into a home, but his closed heart into something capable of loving again. Her response was equally honest and vulnerable, admitting that she had found in that makeshift family the peace and purpose that she thought she had lost forever. The marriage proposal, when it finally came 3 months later, was made in a way that perfectly reflected the extraordinary journey they had shared. He knelt in the same room where she had saved his children, the place where their lives intertwined irreversibly, offering not only his love, but the formalization of a family that already existed in their hearts. The wedding ceremony, held 6 months later in an intimate celebration in the gardens of the mansion, marked the definitive end of a chapter of pain and the beginning of a new story built on true love, forgiveness, and second chances. The twins, now walking with unsteady but determined steps, participated in the ceremony as an essential part of the new family that was being formalized. The official adoption of the children by her was processed simultaneously with the wedding, ensuring that the family that fate had created in such an unusual way was legally recognized and protected forever. She finally had not only a clean name, but also a completely new identity as a wife and mother. And during the wedding party, while watching the twins playing in the garden where everything had started on that stormy night more than a year ago, both reflected on the tortuous paths that fate had used to unite them. An attempted robbery had turned into a rescue. A desperate escape had become an encounter with true love, and a night of despair had given rise to the most improbable and happy family anyone could imagine. The businessman's fortune, which had previously represented only financial security and social status, now had a completely different meaning. His investments in stocks, his diversified holdings, and all his assets accumulated over the years became tools to build a secure and prosperous future for the family that had become the reason for his existence. 2 years after that fateful night, while watching the twins take their first steps in the same garden where she had planned only to steal some valuables, both understood that sometimes fate uses the most unexpected paths to unite souls that need each other, transforming moments of absolute despair into the foundations of a happiness that neither had dared to dream possible.